Okay, I see 4 hands. Where's the mic? Ah, there it is. So right there, and then there, and then there, and then there. Okay. And then there.
Question for Eleanor. One thing that would help me buy your paper, which I think is really terrific, is if you actually could say a little bit about the Amalekite story, not the Israelite story. Are there goods in Eleanorean Christianity that are going to benefit the Amalekites, presumably post-mortem, because they're all supposed to die? Partly it just seems to me perhaps Eleanorean Christianity may not have those goods, but maybe they do. So to really complete the story, it seems to me you have to say a little bit of something about their story too.
Well, I guess I thought I did say something about their story. I said 2 things about it. I mean, in the world of my thought experiment, there's a morally sufficient reason for God to allow suffering, and it includes benefits for the sufferer that defeat the suffering for that sufferer. If there is no such thing, then as I said at the conclusion of my paper, we don't need to bother with a story of the Amalekites. I mean, we have weighty reason for rejecting theism just in the problem of evil. So in the world of my thought experiment, there is a morally sufficient reason for God to allow suffering. And if there's a morally sufficient reason for God to allow suffering, then there is one for him to allow the suffering of the Amalekites too. Now you might say, look, here's the thing, why don't we have the story of the Amalekites too? Why don't we have that story? And the Edomites, and the Ammonites, and the Amorites, and the Philistines, and the Canaanites, and the Assyrians, and the Babylonians. I mean, now we are going to have, you might say, a very pedestrian and boring story, the kind an accountant would want. Let's hear everything about everybody. But it seems to me, in a sense, we don't need that. We need one story, which gives us, as it were, a typological example about how it's supposed to work. And that one story can then stand in for everybody. Unless you want to think that God is the equivalent of a potentate in a small country who cares about his crew and nobody else, then you're going to have to think that God is the God of love, loves everybody. I mean, that's the Judeo-Christian story. And if he loves everybody, then the story of what he does with the Israelites is a type of what he's going to do with everybody. And you can guess at the story of the Amalekites by extrapolating from the story of the Israelites. That's what I would say. Mutatis mutandis.
Here. I saw a lot of hands. I hope I'll get it in the right order. But
this is a question for Eleanor, basically pressing a point Paul was making. It seems like you have to reject one of these 3 claims, all of which seem plausible. Well, at least all of which you're committed to. So one of them is, you say it's wrong, it would be bad to think that God commands genocide, but you do think that God did command, well, in this story at least, that God did command the killing of a whole people. And then the last one that makes those 2 inconsistent is that genocide just is the killing of a whole group of people. So you have to let one of those go. Which one do you let go?
Well, the last one, that's the whole point about torture in my story about the hospital. If you look up torture in the Oxford English Dictionary, which in my world is the dictionary, you will find that one of the meanings of torture is the infliction of serious physical or psychological suffering. But that can't be the definition of torture. It just can't. Not every reference works that gives a definition of a complicated concept is philosophically adequate, and the OED, however wonderful it is not philosophically adequate for torture. Because if that were right, then we get a lot of things turning out to be torture, which plainly aren't torture. So clearly you have to add something more to the definition of torture, and one of the things I think you would have to add is that, I would say the infliction of serious moral or the infliction of serious physical or psychological suffering is a genus within which torture is a species. But what differentiates the species from other things within the genus is going to have to be something about your motivation. That is, your motivation for doing what you're doing and inflicting this suffering is harm or destruction to the person to whom you are doing it. That's got to be the point of inflicting that suffering. And I would say about genocide, I don't feel licensed or competent to produce a definition of the species for genocide. But I would say that what you've given as the apparent definition for genocide is a genus within which the species will fall. And what will differentiate that species from other things within the genus is similarly something about the motivation. You're going to be doing what you do in order to hurt or undermine or in some other way wreck the thing that you are eradicating. And that is what, in my interpretation of the story, is not going to be God's motivation.
Of course, can I just,
Yes.
just quickly, of course, I don't, ultimately, the dispute here is not then going to be about the definition of genocide. I mean, if she defines it in a different way than me, that's fine. Then the dispute will be about, I mean, my claim would be that for human beings anyways, to intentionally destroy a people, just like just murder, killing on your own authority, that's always wrong. I mean, you can come up with, really bizarre counterexamples, or you talk about self-defense or something like that, but then, is that really murder? But similarly, to intentionally, I think what we've learned, partly because of the Holocaust, is that intentionally trying to destroy a people, right, is always wrong for human beings. And that's I think that's pretty deeply entrenched. So that's where I think ultimately that's where the real disagreement comes down to, not the definition.
Okay, there's there and then there.
This is for Eleanor. Hearing your broader narrative with all the different things that God does, really a plausible way of hearing that is that God is sort of trying out one thing after another and finding out that none of them work too well, though there's a cumulative effect that is positive. Now, I know that you said that, in your view, apparently, God, before he makes each such attempt, knows exactly what the result is going to be. But given that, as I believe is the case, that you don't accept middle knowledge, for God to know those things prior to his decision would induce massive causal circularity. And so I'm wondering if you might be willing to reconsider your rejection of open theism.
I had a suspicion where this was going. I need to make two small corrections, two small footnotes. One is that I don't, in fact, accept middle knowledge. I'm not sure how Paul got that attributed to me, but that's not right. And the other small footnote is that the translation that Al was using, which has punishment in the text, actually is a mistranslation. During that session, Kelly Clark lent me his computer, and I checked it pretty thoroughly in the Hebrew. It's just a mistranslation. So just to get that out of the way. So as for Bill's question about open theism, I mean, I guess in theory, there's something right about what Bill says, but in my view, there are some things you can know about a person without having middle knowledge and without invoking any kind of circularity of foreknowledge. So, for example, I have one daughter, 3 children and 1 daughter. I love my little daughter to distraction. Now, you might ask yourself this question. If you offer me a nickel to cut up my daughter into 1-inch square cubes of flesh, would I accept that offer? And then you might think to yourself, how would I know? I don't have middle knowledge. How would I know what you do? But that, I really don't. And it's the same way for other things. If you've got pancreatic cancer, and I wonder if feeding you sesame seeds would cure it, well, then, actually, I don't really need middle knowledge to know that won't work. On the basis of what I know about the way the world is, I can know some things are not going to work. And so that's what I would say. For when you've got a deeply entrenched disease, you can know that mild things won't cure it. And that's what I think we got here.
Well, if you know that, so can the God of open theism know that. So we're on an equal basis there, which I think is absolutely the case.
The question was whether I thought my line had to move me in the direction of open theism. The answer to that is no.
Okay, next question. Wait, hold on. There's a huge queue, and I'm starting to forget it. I know he's next, so please bring it. Could people who I've already recognized raise their hand? Were you one? Oh, okay. Is next. I'm sorry. See, I'm already. It's after dinner. It's late. Him and then you. Yes.
So I have a question for Professor Draper. So Professor Anthony in her talk admitted that moral reasoning is non-monotonic, and it seems plausible to think that moral principles therefore are going to be non-monotonic. So they're going to be stated in conditional form, and they're going to be such that adding stuff to the antecedent might make the principle false. And so it seems like here you're invoking a principle, namely that intentionally attempting to eradicate a people is always wrong. And so I think that under certain circumstances, if you add enough stuff to the antecedent, you might come up with a case where it turns out that the principle is actually false. So here's a somewhat bizarre counterexample, but imagine that through a strange biological mutation, a certain ethnic group, they become vampires, ravenous, ravening vampires, right? And they just start assaulting and killing everyone around them. It seems, and suppose that we know that being a member of this ethnic group is highly nomically correlated with being a vampire, right? Suppose actually it's just a necessary connection, right? I mean, this is logically possible, at least broadly logically possible. So it seems that if the President of the United States were to order the United States Marine Corps to go to wherever this people group is concentrated and just eradicate every last one of them, it's at least not clear to me that that would constitute genocide. So, what do you think?
Actually, yeah, the example I was thinking about was the movie Independence Day, when the aliens come and they're going to, the only way to save humanity is, I mean, this may be a little bit different than the story, but say the only way is to destroy the mothership, and suppose that destroys all of these aliens, every last one of them, right? And so then it's in self-defense. And so similarly, like Eleanor, I think, defined murder as killing on your own authority. Well, you might kill on your own authority in self-defense, and we usually wouldn't call that murder then. We might not call this genocide if in that sort of situation.